Alchemy is all about transformation. Transformation into gold, traditionally, historically. I'm taking the word and putting it into the 21st century. I'm talking about transformation of a photograph, of the photographic print primarily, whether digital or analogue, and the transformation into something completely different. Alchemists was one of those loose choices of a really beautiful poetic word that seemed to fit.
I was kind of interested in this intervention or working into the image, both to take away but also to add, and sort of that tension between those two. Spending several days of painting onto the photograph is also a different way of getting to know the image. Physically, the artist's relationships to the prints has been really crucial. So I remember reading about Julia Margaret Cameron's process, and that she kind of intentionally would leave fingerprints and like would leave strands of her hair, not see that as a mistake in the printing, but actually say that, you know, that they're printed with this physicality and the sensuality, and sort of want that trace of the artist in her work.
Moving beyond the print's a very interesting phenomenon, actually. It's something that's really fascinated me for ages. The print is the final object in the process of producing an image. You end up with a flat piece of paper in your hand. That is the print. And what's happened, and you've got people stitching onto it, painting over it, like Esther Teichmann, painting completely hiding the surface of the print, putting stuff more and more onto the print, disguising the print and hiding it. Somebody did ask me if this is a new movement. I don't think it is a movement, because as Simon Baker said in the talk earlier today, a movement requires a manifesto and it requires people protesting and so on. There isn't that happening. And this is a diverse collection of works. But there is something that's changed very radically. What I wanted to do was put together all of these types of changes with the photographic print or the photographic image and the technical things that are changing. They're always dotted around exhibitions. You get something here of an embroidered, Julie Cockburn embroidering beautifully, Melinda Gibson doing collages, or they're all dotted around. I wanted the whole lot so people could get an appreciation of what's actually happening in a big way. And I do intend to expand it because there's so much I had to miss out.
We should talk about Photoshop a little bit more, just
Yes.
because it's kind of interesting, and everyone apart from me knows how to use it. I'm a useless photography curator. This is my first camera. This is the first camera I ever owned. It's on my iPhone. The second camera I ever bought is a Fuji Instax Polaroid, because in a way what happens is once everybody now has a camera, everybody takes pictures. The first thing that I wanted to do is to go back and remember what a photograph is like as an object, which is rather strange. But I think that is just a sort of biographical example. But this is something that you see in art practice very, very strongly. It seems to me that whenever there's a move forward in technological terms, and I think Photoshop and the fact that digital camera is a massive seismic shift in the photographic medium. Whenever there's a move forward, there's also a counteract, a kind of reaction against it.
You know, we've been talking for a while now about the convergence of photography and film, ever since, and before, of course, but ever since cameras contain film machinery, so you could go from one to the other very quickly, and that convergence is transformed, and a lot of photographers are mixing the two together. This blurring is also moving over into photography and painting. It's moving between different media. It's all I think it's an incredibly exciting time for photography.
The photographs that I have here are part of a series of portraits that I manipulate. And they could be oil paintings, they could be prints or postcards of people. They all have something in common, which is that there's a particular sort of patterner. There's something very wonderful about finding, particularly these portraits that I've used for this exhibition, that have the creases and the bruises and the scratches and stuff, that give them a sort of a vulnerability, I suppose. And it really enables me to add my intervention and sort of resurrect them and sort of bring them back to life and rescue them on some level. So I can sort of add on my interventions and somehow sort of change a photo from what it was to something new. And I believe that they sort of hold their own and they become a new piece of work. It's like a collaboration, I suppose, between an old photographer who I've never met, and I can reinvigorate these pieces.
One of the people who's quite interesting, I think, in this respect, we're talking about painting and the convergence, is Jorma Puranen, and he's a Finnish photographer and a professor of photography at Helsinki University. What he does is very interesting because he takes out into the far Arctic north, he takes a big a set of blocks, planks of wood, which serve as a canvas, actually, because he paints them with 3 layers of black gloss paint, leaves them out in the environment over the winter, and waits for the weather to change, really. Then he comes back and photographs the reflections of the landscape and of the surroundings, or close-ups of a cherry branch on a tree in spring. And what you get is the kind of distortion and defects from the weather on this pure surface of sheen of black gloss paint. And the works look very, very painterly, because it's against the black, but it's absolutely a photograph. So many people have said, are they paintings? And he's working in a very kind of converged way, if you like, and they're exquisitely beautiful, but they're photographic reflections.
For me personally, I like to take old things and make them new. I delved into ambrotypes and such, and I actually found a ambrotype a couple of years ago in Spitalfields on a Thursday. Anyone wants to go, it's great. You can find really cool little ambrotypes and things. And I found these ambrotypes. I thought, oh, what, you know, how can I make these? And basically took about a year or so on the internet and had loads of these recipes from like the 1850s. And from then on, it was just a matter of like, I wonder if I can actually build it. And I kind of built it before I knew it'd work or not. So I built this giant camera, and then I built a tilt-shift mechanism out of wood. And I had this series of brass lenses and then different chemistry. And I built it all, and I didn't even know it worked. So when it worked, I was kind of surprised at first. And then took about a year perfecting it, and before I utilised it for a project.
To go back to the surface, talking about the changes in the surface, how you're changing the surface of the print. Another way of doing this work is changing the surface of the negative. And Aliki Braine is absolutely wonderful at what she's done. She takes a negative and she uses a hole puncher to create small round holes. Different sized hole punches you can get, I didn't realise that. And when they're printed, they come out as great big black round clusters, really, of blobs in the shape of trees. And they're all set in a landscape. You get this very, very black effect in the landscape with these great big blobby trees. The one I like probably the best is a photograph of a forest, and she's dropped blobs around the base of the trunks, and they're kind of in a dynamic state. It looks like there's a kind of action amongst the base of the trees. It's called The Hunt. And she is someone who teaches history of art and also photography, and studied history of art at various institutions, and then got into photography later. And you can see the influence of some of the 18th century painters of landscapes with very dark trees, and also the work of the hunting one is based on Uccello's The Hunter, with all those animals and people in the woods. So I really like that, because she's taking the actual negative, taking it out. You know, it used to be sacrosanct, the print. You would never dream of crossing out your friend who you've fallen out with, or your ex-husband, because a print is sacrosanct. I remember not throwing away prints because I can't, these are photographs, you know, and now people are scratching and cutting and distorting, and it's not, I mean, people have always done it, I'm sure, but this is a very big, different way of doing it.
I never seem to be able to leave the photograph alone. It never seems to be enough just to take a photograph, and every once in a while I challenge myself to take photographs and see if I could just exhibit them just as pure images, and I find I can't leave them alone. And I suspect that it's in part because of possibly a love of what today I think we're going to call it craft or craftsmanship.
And one of the reasons I chose to have one of the talks about craft and photography is because I hate the fact that craft is always considered a second-class cousin, really, and it never gets the kind of esteem that it is worthy of. And some of the modern craft artists are just absolutely stunning. This is craft, and the things that people are doing today, I mean, collaging is highly skilled, cutting those things out. Melinda is just one example of people doing collages, of course. John Steziker is a perfect example. And I do want to make the point that I'm not somebody who is not into digital photography. I mean, I see room for both. There is a lot of craft-based work here in traditional sense, like painting over photograph, embroidering and so on, but there's a lot of very different things together, all crafted, I'd say. Okay, and on to David Birkin, which is actually the final piece of work in the exhibition, and I'm seated against the wall, which is like the end wall of the whole exhibition, and the culmination of all this work. In a way, this is how I planned it. And I think it works quite well because this is very decorative in a way. You're walking into a wall of these beautiful red tones. Actually, these are X-ray boxes from hospitals around London that have just thrown them away because they've moved on to more advanced technology. And these are plates, negatives, taken from a whole big project of the Iraq body count. What he's done is he's taken the codes of the people killed in the Iraq war who've been identified and given numbers. He's translated those numbers into colour. All of these negatives all have printed up beside the names and details of the victim and their code. And the interesting thing is that in all of them, the colour units, red, yellow and blue, come out dominated by red. So he's calling it 30 Shades of Red.